Hey, welcome back to Kevin Wilson SBC. Guys, it's time. We are so close to taking the 48 Ford back out for trip number 3 to the drag strip. I am really excited about the changes we've made over the winter. I want to cover those with you today. And more importantly, I want to cover some rear suspension changes that we've made. We've made some ARB changes. We've made some 4-link bar changes. More importantly, we've made rear shock changes to go with how the 48 Ford is reacting on the hit. I want to make sure you understand these changes. The more power you begin to put down to your race car, the more important it is to understand what your shocks are doing and what do those clicks really mean with regard to clamping force and velocity of the movement of the chassis. Let's cover this today. Let's see if we can break it down, and let's see if I can meet my goal of getting the 48 Ford in the 1.10 60-foot times on the next outing to the track. Please subscribe to the channel. Please watch the videos. Leave me comments. Leave me a thumbs up. Let's go. Let's cover some of the basic changes we've made, especially related to safety. The 48 Ford had 33 spline axles and a 33 spline spool. We felt with the power we're putting down on the hit, we felt it was time to go to 40 spline axles and a 40 spline spool. I got with Strange Engineering and we made that happen. Now what that required was a center section case change. We were running a 3.062 bore case for the carrier bearings, and a 40 spline spool will not accept that small of a carrier bearing. So we had to change the center section housing out, and we went with a 3.25, a 3.25 inch carrier bearing. So we made those changes. We got the 40 spline spool put in. We got a new set of 389 Pro gears. We have 40 spline axles made. This is all from Strange Engineering. So those are just key critical safety components. Another part of the safety component are the wheels. We were running the Billet Specialty 15 by 14 wide, and we switched over to the double beadlock Billet Specialty wheels. I did stay with a 15-inch wheel. We were running the metric brakes on the rear, and with a 15-inch beadlocks with the metric brakes, we were too close to the beadlocks. So at that point, I made the decision. I got with Strange Engineering, and we went with a set of the Strange Engineering disc brakes for the big Ford, late Ford Torino pattern. And they have a low profile caliper option that we've got installed on the 48 Ford. So it's a 4-piston caliper, and it's a lighter weight assembly, 5/8 inch wheel studs. You can see here we got plenty of clearance on that now, and I feel like the 4-piston calipers are going to be a much better braking system than a single piston GM metric caliper. With that brake kit, we did decide to go with the hard metallic pads. The front of the car still has the stock GM metric front calipers, and we are running some aftermarket pads on the front that have a little better cold coefficient stopping power than just a regular brake pad from the parts store. Along with the double beadlock wheels, we did go with the same size slick, but a stiff sidewall slick. The stiff sidewall slicks are highly recommended for a car that's over 3,000 pounds. And here again, we were hitting the rear slicks so hard and crushing the sidewalls so much. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. At this point, it was another safety matter. We wanted a stiff sidewall slick on the car. That's going to help us on our launch. It's going to help us on the 60 foot. It's all about the combination of all these pieces working together. So those are some pretty critical safety components that we did over the winter. So those are the safety changes that we've incorporated, what I would call safety changes. Some of those were necessary because of the double beadlock wheels. But those are key safety changes I feel is going to help make me safer in the 48 Ford with the kind of power we're putting down to the ground. Now, one quick thing, on our wheels, we run a 14-inch wide rim wheel. So these are 15 by 14 double beadlock Billet Specialties SFI approved lightweight drag wheels. We run a 5-inch offset. So when we had the rear end narrowed for the 48 Ford, we wanted to have a 5-inch offset. I don't like running that wide of a wheel with only 3 inches of offset. If you think about how far out the axle is from the center line of the wheel, you've got a lot of force pressing down on that wheel, and it's very much offset to the rear of the wheel. So we move our offset in closer to the center of the wheel to help load that wheel more evenly on the hit and going down the track. That means you have to take into account your frame rail clearance and your tub clearance, and we did all that when we back half the 48 Ford. But we do generally run more offset on our wide wheels than a lot of people, and the reason is simple physics. Getting the axle moved, getting the mounting point, the flange moved more towards the center of the wheel, so that when you're loading the wheel, you're not loading the wheel way out here and creating, an opportunity for that wheel to flex. Your wheel should not flex. I understand that. But if you think about the weight of the car and the hit of the car, I didn't want to take that chance. So we always run our axles a little deeper in the wheel than a lot of people. So that covers some of these safety components of the 48 Ford. Now let's talk about some of the interesting details about why the 4-link change and why the shock change. Let's start off with the 4-link changes that we made from the second trip out to what we're going to go with on the third trip out. I'm going to go ahead and put on the screen what the 48 Ford had the last time we went out. So let's look at what we had when we took the 48 Ford out the last time. You can see here that we had an instant center length of 44 inches and the height of the instant center was 7.5 inches. The 48 Ford has a high center of gravity and the car is very nose heavy. It is nearly 2,000 pounds on the nose and only roughly around 1,483 on the rear. The car is very nose heavy. And the car ran better the second time out and put down better 60-foot times. But remember, on this trip out, we had the QA1 DD501s fully maxed out on extension. Now let's look at what we're going to the next time we go out. This is what the car will have in it when we go out the next time. We've extended the instant center length to 53 inches, almost 53.5 inches, but we've brought the height up to 9.11 inches, a little over 1.5 inch height, taller height on the instant center than what we had before. By going a little longer, I'm not helping my wheel stand problem at all. So to help compensate for going with a little longer instant center length, I did move the lower bar up one bolt hole on the rear end and the chassis. So I moved the bottom bar up evenly, and you can see it's going to have just a very, very slight uphill rake from the rear end to the chassis. Very slight. I think with this, the car, along with the Penske shocks and the stiff sidewall slicks, I believe the combination now is getting closer to correct for what we're trying to do. These are the actual changes that we will be going out with on the 4 link bars. Also remember, in one of my previous videos, we talked about how the car was dipping or leaning over the right rear more than the left rear. We are running a rear anti-roll bar, and I've always ran the roll bar in neutral setting with me in the car. So neither link is loaded any more than the other with me sitting in the car. What we're doing now is we're going to take the right rear anti-roll bar link, and I'm going to extend it from neutral. I'm going to lengthen that link 1 turn. Yes, it's going to put a little static load on the right rear initially, but on the hit, when the car wants to try to lean over the right rear, it's going to move that weight back over towards the center and level the rear end out on the hit. So 4 link bar changes, nothing drastic here. Anti-roll bar, right rear, lengthened just 3/4 of a turn to 1 full turn. So with the bar changes and the ARB changes, the rear anti-roll bar changes, now let's transition and talk a little bit more in depth about why I have changed from the QA1s to the Penske 7500 double adjustable shocks. I'm going to show you the dyno graph one more time from the QA1 DD501s. This is not the dyno graph of my shock. I talked to QA1, and what they did is they said they can send me what they generally put in the DD, the double digressive 501 or the double digressive series in general. They could show me the rebound and compression valving that they generally put in all their shocks. Now, I wanted to say that to be clear though, my DD501s, I did not dyno test them. The Penske shocks that I've got, and what I'm going to show you here in a minute, are the actual dyno graphs for my shocks that Penske built and sent to me. All right, so here's the dyno graph of the DD501s, and this is really not rocket science. What you will see here, and I want you to focus on the red lines. The red lines are the max amount of clicks. So the bottom of this graph is the rebound graph. And this is fully tight. On the left, you have how much clamp force it takes to move the shock or to extend the shock 1 inch to 6 inches at a rate of 1 to 6 inches. I told you in the last video, the shock dyno is not moving your shock a total of 6 inches of travel. It's normally about 2 to 2.5 inches of travel on a shock dyno, but it's moving it at a velocity rate that would equal to 6 inches a second or 10 inches a second. Each point on this graph along the bottom is how fast or what's the velocity that the dyno is moving your shock to give you how much clamp force, or in pounds, does it take to move that shock that quick, that distance. One thing that I want you to note is I had my shocks maxed out at 18 clicks. So at 6 inches a second, I think I said in the last video, let's call that 470 pounds of clamp force it takes to extend my QA1s 6 inches a second. 470 pounds is what it takes to do that. Now, I've shown you in my previous videos that with that setting, I could outrun the shock. I could blow past the shock and completely distort the sidewall of the slick. As a matter of fact, in the second trip out to the track, I did not use the trans brake at all. That was me foot braking the car every pass, because when I used the trans brake, it just blew by the shocks even harder, as you can imagine. So the 123 60 foots was me foot braking the 48 Ford, still extending the shock way too fast, and trying to control that with a heavier spring and with the compression valving, which worked out okay for me, but not ideal. So let's talk about what we went to. So we took the QA1s off. Now, I'm going to show you a graph from my Penske shocks. And I'm not going to show you all the settings. This graph has 3 lines: full soft, full hard, and the red line is where I'm going to go out and start. So this, I wanted them to include the dyno graph for the recommended settings for going out with the 48 Ford on the next trip. If you notice, this graph has taken us out to nearly 10 inches a second. But let's just compare at 6 inches a second. Let's do a comparison to what the dyno graph is saying on the rebound and the compression. I'm more focused on the rebound because I need to control the 48 Ford and how hard it separates. 6 inches a second, we're showing, I would call that about 1,050. To compare with the QA1s, we are over 1,000 pounds of clamp force to move that shock 6 inches a second. Now, what is that going to do? What that's going to do is, on the hit, when the car hits and the shock separates, and you have the shock separating on the hit, that amount of force increase, so I am almost 2.5 times the clamp force of the QA1s at 6 inches a second. So going from 470 to almost 1,100, I'm over 2 times the amount of clamp force for sure. What that's going to do is that's going to slow down how much and how fast that shock impacts the sidewall of the slick. I don't want to crush the slick so far that the wheel is nearly touching the track. I don't want to do that. But I do want to plant the slick a little bit, but have some controlled wheel speed and let the slick actually have some controlled spin. I'm not trying to dead hook a slick tire. So by having a shock that has the proper valving in it, that can hold that chassis and not allow you to blow through it, is going to help the forces plant the slick, but then create more of the compression valving to come over, let the weight transfer on the rear end of the car, and then use the compression valving to allow the slick to have some wheel speed through the first 60 foot of the hit. By having control of the car on the launch now and not letting the shock just separate violently and crush the sidewall of the slick, which leads to a lot of rear end squat when the car crushes like that. The slick wrinkles, and that really pulls the front end up higher in the air. By not letting that action happen so fast, by slowing that down, I'm going to have more control of the rear end. Also, One big change with the Penske shocks is I went from a 150-pound spring, coilover spring, to a 125-pound coilover spring. Now I can actually run the spring the weight of the car calls for, but I can control what's happening with that spring with the shock. Now I have the compression valving to allow the slick to come back up in a controlled manner and let the spring actually begin to work as I go down the track. And once I get past the 60 foot, get the front end stable on the ground again. Hopefully this makes a little more sense now. The whole goal is to not blow through the shocks. Now you will notice on the graph for the Penske shocks, the shock has around 44 total clicks of rebound and compression. On the rebound and on the Penske shocks and most of your higher end shocks, you're going to start all of your adjustments from full tight. So on the red graph, you go all the way full tight, and my rebound is going to be minus 20. So I'm going to back off from full tight 20 clicks. On the compression, for starting out on the compression, I'm going to go 35 clicks from full tight. I have a lot of compression range and rebound range left in this shock. I've said before, if you're having to run your shocks at the max amount of clicks or within 1 click of the max amount, you are eventually going to run out of adjustment. I wanted the shocks in a sweet spot where I could go softer or harder with the amount of clicks remaining. And as you can see, I have a lot of room on the compression to tighten up the compression if I need to hold the slick more to the track. So the Penske shocks, the 125-pound springs, the goal is, can I get the 48 Ford into the 1.10 60 foot braking? I want to crawl, walk, run, and understand this combination. If I can get the car into the 1.10 60 foots with a foot brake action, now I know it's game on. And I know that I can actually pour it to it more with the setup that I have and keep control of the 48 Ford more. Very soon, we will go out and test again. I just wanted to do a quick video covering the changes we've made and explain a little bit more about the rear shock change. These are not, shocks where I have air to them so that I can have a tight rebound on the hit and about 1 or 1.5 seconds in the run, dump that air and have normal or a softer rebound. These are not the Penske 8300s. These are the 7500s, and I got to be careful that I don't get the valving so tight to control the hit that then I have a problem on the top end. I still have to have the car working in both scenarios. With my budget and with the money I had available to me, I did decide to go with the 7500s with this valving. I could have stepped on up to the 8300s and had air and different things going on, but I just didn't have the budget for that. Now that we've got all this set up, I believe I will have better control of the 48 Ford, and I believe I will get the car in the 1.10 60 foot braking. On this shock dyno, I don't know how many of you know him, but Mike Lucas, he goes by Seattle Mike. He's very well known on the Yellow Bullet forums. He was a crew chief for a Pro Mod car several years back. Well, he is back in the market and helping Pro Mod guys and Outlaw 10.5 guys with tuning their suspensions. Mike and I have had some conversations over email here recently, and he has shared some amazing data with me, a shock dyno graph and a data logging of the shock travel and shock velocity on a Pro Mod run. And I think it's going to help you understand more about why I'm so focused on the shock dyno data, and I'm going to share that with you in an upcoming video. Mike is also, we've talked a lot about squaring up a car, squaring up your chassis. And in one of the videos that I did on Facebook, I showed a quick glimpse of us squaring up and centering the rear end in the car. And the method I use is only good if your chassis is square. And the chassis in the 48 Ford is square. And what I mean by that is I was measuring off of points on the chassis to center the rear end in the car, forward and back, and left to right. And if you're using points on the chassis to do that, but your chassis isn't square, now you have a bigger problem. And many guys are trying to get their rear end centered in the car with a chassis that's not square. So in an upcoming video, I'm also going to go over a method. Mike calls it the string method. We've done it in the shop, a small variance of what Mike is going over with me, with chalk on the floor and on your shop floor and plunge bobs and getting everything measured out. But I'm going to go over what Mike shared with me, which is using the string method to confirm your chassis is square, and then start squaring up your rear end and other points in the car, including the wheelie bars, making sure the wheelie bars are squared. I hope this made some sense. Please stay tuned to the channel. I will go over everything that we do at the track. The video footage will tell the story. We will either have improved and got closer to the 1.10 60 foots or gotten into the 1.10 60 foots, or we will digress and have to learn the new valving even more. I'm pretty confident though at the next trip out. The first couple runs may be learning. I may have to make some changes with the adjustments of the shocks while we're there, but I'm confident before we leave, I will have the 60 foot better with these new Penske shocks and the lighter springs, with the 4-link changes, the stiff sidewall slicks, and the ARB changes. I think the car is going to actually work much, much better, but only time will tell. Remember, I'm trying to accomplish 3 things. I'm trying to go fast, I'm trying to go straight, and I'm trying to be safe.